So, after watching Season 2, Episode 9 of For All Mankind, titled Triage, I went to my wife and I said, honey, if you're ever about to go on a dangerous mission and I'm acting grumpy with you and to such an extent that you pry out of me what's going on, and instead of lying to you so that you can go on your mission and not be distracted by what I've told you, I tell you that I've had an affair, it doesn't matter with who, and you tell me, are you committed to our marriage? And my response is, you're so black and white. Everything is so binary with you. You don't live in the real world like the rest of us. I told my wife that she should divorce me if I did that. And I would give the same advice to Ed regarding Karen. She is awful. And I don't think the show wants us to see her that way, but when I look at the way that she's acted in this season, and granted she's gone through a lot of horrible stuff, that they lost a son, something that a lot of marriages don't recover from, and there's other things. I don't think that Ed is any saint, and obviously being married to an astronaut comes with a lot of challenges. I still think that the way that she acted this episode and last episode is just ridiculous, and I don't know if the writers don't want us to like the character or if they don't realize how unlikable they have made her, but she's not very likable. So Drew here, and it's kind of funny, I know that I'm talking about the marriage of Ed and Karen this week, but honestly, this episode was not as explosive as I expected it to be. It was kind of like the lull before the storm. I mean, there's a lot of things that are developing for next week's finale, but a lot of things were just not, escalating as quickly as I expected them to. Like the fact that Margot and Sergei are still working together to have the flight meet up in space and, have the Russian astronauts, the Russian cosmonauts and the American astronauts meet up for the mission. That was surprising to me. I expected that to break down more quickly. And there's a blockade going on of the people at the lunar base, but otherwise it didn't really seem like the fallout from the shooting of these two astronauts last week was as severe as I expected, until the end of this episode, of course. But that, came out of nowhere seemingly. Like it seemed as though tensions were kind of starting to dissipate instead of escalate. So now it's going to be really interesting to see where they go with this, because while I'm not defending shooting people who have done seemingly nothing, it isn't really as bad, and I don't think, as attacking someone's base in an aggressive fashion like this. And yes, they're responding to what the Americans have done, and yes, I would have a hard time swallowing that my fellow cosmonaut wants to defect to the US. I would think that the Americans were trying to pull a fast one there. But still, it's a very aggressive action, and Reagan, oh man, I don't even know how he will respond to this. It's going to be a perilous episode next week, I imagine, and I don't know how things can be de-escalated to a certain extent. Things seem like they're headed towards escalation and more escalation. I don't know how you come back from attacking someone else's lunar base like this. It was an interesting sequence when it happened. I think the best moment was that moment when you saw the Russian cosmonaut, the lone Russian cosmonaut out there, and they're like, what's he doing? And then, you're sitting there going, uh-oh, this is an oh crap moment, because you know that he's up to no good and that they're about to be attacked. I kind of expected him to have an RPG or something, but then he just shot the window, and it was interesting to see the effects of that as it was sucking everything out of the room. I expected it to be more catastrophic than it was. I'm kind of surprised that they don't have sturdier windows, that they're not at least bulletproof, because, who knows what debris could come and hit it, and then, suddenly they're all getting sucked out onto the moon, as we saw one person get sucked out onto the moon in quite a visually stunning moment. So I was kind of surprised by that, but at least they have like a way to sequester themselves from that room. And possibly a way to seal it eventually, I expect. But now the Russians are invading the base, and what the fallout from that is going to be for the characters on the moon and for the people back at home, I think it's a really good cliffhanger. It's 2 weeks in a row where they've ended the episode on a strong note, and hopefully next week actually is, a strong episode. To me, this was a weaker episode than I would have expected given what happened last week, so I could see them pulling a fast one and doing that again, where next week isn't that exciting either. This week, mainly focused on relationships again, and particularly marriages. I already talked about Ed and Karen somewhat facetiously, but I definitely do feel that Karen is not being a good wife at this point, and Ed has his flaws, I get it. I think that we're supposed to buy into some of what Karen is saying about him. I don't think that it would be fair to just disregard what she's saying because it's not the time to say it, but it's not the time to say it. And I'm interpolating a little bit, but I don't understand what she thought she was doing this week. I would have liked to see some follow-up with Kelly Baldwin and her discovery of her family, her birth parent. I would have liked to see some follow-up with that, but maybe they're saving that for something to do next season, or maybe that's it. Maybe she's actually just not going to introduce herself to him, and she just needed to see him. We'll have to wait and see, but I kind of was surprised that they didn't immediately follow up with that. I think that a flaw of prestige television these days is that they push a lot of plot lines down the road where you really feel like the ramifications and the continuing story would happen more immediately, and it wouldn't be something that would get pushed down the road, so to speak. Otherwise, on the moon, we see Tracy and Gordo kind of rekindle their romance. I thought that it was a very, very sweet moment between the two of them, and I really, really enjoyed, it was just brief, just quick, but they've been building to the two of them getting back together all season, and whether this is a temporary or a permanent thing, who can say? A lot of you have been theorizing that Gordo is probably going to die or Tracy could die, and I can't disagree, but at this point it's who could you get the best odds on if there was a site guessing which characters were going to die at the end of this season? Because you've got Ed, going on his mission into space with these two kind of anonymous characters. They've taken a little bit of time to develop them, but we hardly know them compared to how we know Danny and Gordo and Tracy and some of these other characters. So to me, they kind of seem like red shirts. So you'd get pretty good odds on those two biting the dust. You'd get pretty good odds on Ed biting the dust as well because, he's having relationship issues, and it kind of seems like it would be a good way to make Kelly really, really scarred for life and angry at Karen, and it is also a good way to make Karen, kind of feel bad about herself. You'd also get good odds on Gordo and on Tracy because they've had this romantic interlude, and it seems like they've kind of sorted things out. So yeah, I don't know who's going to be left alive by the end of the season. It seems like a lot of characters could die, and I don't really want any of them to die, so Otherwise, I think the plot line with Molly and her husband, I think that they tried very hard with Karen to show what it would be like for someone who didn't have a foot in the astronaut world, that was kind of outside of things. And I think that they've done a better job actually with Molly's husband, because he's such kind of in many ways not a stereotypical husband. And simultaneously, though, he is a good husband, I would argue. He's supportive of his wife. Now, he didn't do the best this episode when she's struggling with the fact that she's, suffering from the consequences of the radiation she was exposed to in the first episode of the season. And, she's, struggling with this fear of going blind and such. Yeah, she's being stupid, no doubt, but it's an understandable reaction to have. But then to say, I'm going to leave you if you don't not do what you're doing, and you're a coward, or this is cowardice. I wouldn't have said any of that. That doesn't seem like the way to go. Not that I'm perfect in my marriage by any means, but that just seemed like kind of a strong way of putting it. But the fact that she, ultimately recommitted to the marriage, and that moment, tender moment where she said, you're going to have to get used to having a blind old lady around with you. I thought that was a tender moment. So it was nice to see two relationships kind of come back from the edge of the precipice seemingly at the same time as we're watching the Baldwin's marriage implode. So a lot of relationship drama this episode, more than I expected, honestly, given what happened last week. I kind of expected there to be more emphasis on the fallout from last week's events. Ellen, once again, I feel like you have this plot line. I'm not complaining. I do think that it is a more interesting plot line at this point than it was early in the season when I felt like a lot of it just seemed pointless. But simultaneously, I think it's getting to be kind of repetitive in that, we had this relationship end in the past because she chose to be closeted, and now she's, kind of making it obvious that, oh man, wouldn't it be nice if I could continue to have a career? And then Pam sees that their relationship is going to hold her back and lies to her and claims that she doesn't love her and that she loves the woman that she was with when she rekindled her passion with Ellen, and now Ellen is alone again. And, I imagine this isn't where they'll leave things. I imagine that they're going to salvage this relationship somehow, and that will probably mean that Ellen gives up on her political career as a congresswoman and that she has to give up on being head of NASA. Possibly not. Maybe they'll make some point about progressivism and how, if you're qualified for the job, your personal life shouldn't matter. But I tend to think that that's where this is headed. We'll have to wait and see. But Larry, very obviously probably knows what's going on, and he's probably allowing Ellen to stay in the dark because he knows that she can have this career and he doesn't want her to lose it because of her relationship with Pam. And, it's a complicated issue for Larry because obviously it's understandable why he would want this, but, he should be honest with his wife. I think even if they're not like a traditional marriage, I think that they've been partners for so long means that he owes her a degree of honesty, a degree of forthrightness that him not revealing this about Pam is a betrayal of. So overall, this was not the strongest episode of the season for my money. I saw a lot of people online reacting to it and saying that it was the best episode of the season. I feel like the cliffhanger was really strong and it comes at the end and it kind of makes you forget how plotting the episode was on the whole. I enjoyed it. I felt like, a lot of things moved forward, but it was really focused on the relationships, as I said, in a way that I wasn't really expecting in the penultimate episode of the season. I really expected things to be heating up. I expected the Cold War to be heating up more than it was this episode. And obviously next episode, there's going to be so much to deal with, and I wish they had started to deal with it more this week. But let me know what you thought in the comments. If you're interested in seeing my upcoming reviews of other shows, please consider subscribing. And as always, thanks for watching.